Good morning, everyone. I'm now going to do my talk, The Art of Peace and Science of Living. First, I'll light the candle of harmony. This, of course, symbolises the harmony within our hearts. The Bhagavad Gita says the mind must be like a candle flame in a spot free from the wind. So this is symbolic. Imagine the light in the heart, because no matter what happens externally, the spirit remains unchanged. It's a changeless part of us. So that's comfort in difficult times, that we can rise beyond all this and rest at peace within ourselves, within our spirit, within our hearts, within our being. Let's just breathe out any tension. I want just about a minute just to contemplate that quietly. So I can finally get going. This is the fourth time I've tried because I've had interruptions. I had a window cleaner come and various other things. One day I'll have to release a video of bloopers, like they have bloopers for TV programmes. There's quite a lot of them. I have quite a lot of false starts. Hopefully this is the real start. And so we're now going to talk about the art of peace and the science of living. Sadly, the word peace is bandied about rather too much nowadays. TV advertisements for insurance policies promise us peace of mind if we sign on the dotted line. And politicians talk about bringing peace to troubled places, but they do it just in a rather dry way, a dry manner. Some even say that wars are essential to keep the population down, sort of like Ebenezer Scrooge from the Christmas Carol. Not many have an even approximate idea of what the word peace really means in a spiritual sense. This is because the majority of people do not comprehend what spirituality really is. They confuse it with psychism or even emotionalism. In this talk, we are going deep into the world of peace and silence. I owe quite a bit to a book by Morihei Ueshiba. And the first statement in the book, which is called The Art of Peace, says, "The art of peace begins with you. Work on yourself and your appointed task in the art of peace. Everyone has a spirit that can be refined, a body that can be trained in some manner, a suitable path to follow. You are here for no other purpose than to realise your inner divinity and manifest your innate enlightenment. Foster peace in your own life, and then apply the art to all that you encounter." Very wise words. So let's a little bit about Morihei Ueshiba, which will put things in perspective. So he was the founder of Aikido and was born in Japan on December 14th, 1883. As a boy, he was weak and made up his mind to study martial arts. He practiced almost all the existing martial arts around at the time. He went from teacher to teacher, absorbing all that he could, and became a great master himself in time. He also pursued spiritual studies and had a couple of profound experiences that turned his mind away from violence towards the founding of Aikido, which is a non-violent martial art. As a child, he studied Zen under Mitsujo Fujimoto of the Shigon school of Buddhism. He later embraced the Shinto sect Omoto Kyo, founded by Wanisaburo Deguchi. He combined his martial training with his religious and political ideologies. Ueshiba created the modern martial art of Aikido, as I said, because he wanted to get away from the more violent martial arts and ways of living. He died in 1969. And there are some interesting videos on YouTube showing him in action. So let's try to investigate and explore this kind of peace. I think that many negative forces try to instill in our minds the idea that a peaceful state is not possible or desirable. But the way I see it, until we achieve a state of peace, we will not be able to comprehend truly spiritual things. We must also come to understand that peace is not a passive state, not a passive state of being at all, as is generally understood, but the opposite. Well, that's true of the kind of peace that I am talking about anyway. The Master KH, the Theosophical Master KH, writes, "It is upon the serene and placid surface of the unruffled mind that the visions gathered from the invisible find a representation in the visible world. Otherwise you would vainly seek those visions, those flashes of sudden light, which have already helped to solve so many of the minor problems, and which alone can bring the truth before the eye of the soul. It is with jealous care that we have to guard our mind plane from all the adverse influences which daily arise in our passage through earth life." That's very important. It is with jealous care that we have to guard our mind plane from all the adverse influences which daily arise in our passage through earth life. So, to carry on, man has long sought peace, but for as long as he's found reasons that it can never be. William Wordsworth speaks of that blessed mood in which the burthen of the mystery, in which the heavy and the weary weight of all this unintelligible world is lightened. That serene and blessed mood in which the affections gently lead us on, until the breath of this corporeal frame and even the motion of our human blood, almost suspended, we are laid asleep in body and become a living soul. While with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things. I think Wordsworth knew a lot more than most people realised. That's a very profound and deep poem, or part of the poem. So of course this has nothing to do with psychism or emotionalism. It is a natural state in which we become part of nature, part of the nature we've lost touch with. And we are on a path to becoming truly human. The Buddha says, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." And how many hollow words do we use every day? It is possible to use words in such a way that they can heal and inspire. In many ways, the words we use can become like precious jewels. We can plant them like flowers in the garden of another's mind and heart. But often we prefer to fatten our intellect rather than ease the pain of others. So in the 1960s, there was a movement that arose to promote peace and love in the world. Some people believed that a flower had power. But of course, it was a symbol of something that was gentle and harmless. The idea was good, but too many hangers-on and a lack of discipline caused it to break down quickly, though a few did carry on along the original lines. It initiated many ideas, carried on by people like John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and their unorthodox methods for spreading peace. But indeed, as the song goes, all we are saying is give peace a chance. For example, they initiated Baggism. Yoko said that Baggism was inspired by the theme of Antoine de Saint-Exupéry's, pardon my French, story of the Little Prince, which was one sees rightly only with the heart. The essential is invisible to the eyes. That's brilliant. One sees rightly only with the heart. The essential is invisible to the eyes. So she hoped that the bag, by hiding her and John's physical appearance, would make their essence, or the essence of their message, visible. Also, we place ourselves in bags due to stereotyping, etc. H.P. Blavatsky says, "Neither happiness nor prosperity are always the best of bedfellows for such undeveloped mortals as most of us are. They seldom bring peace, which is the only permanent joy. The idea of peace is usually connected with the close of life and a religious state of mind. That kind of peace will, however, generally be found to contain the element of expectation. The pleasures of this world have been surrendered, and the soul waits contentedly in expectation of the pleasures of the next. The peace of the philosophic mind is very different from this and can be attained too early in life, when pleasure has scarcely been tasted, as well as it had been fully drunk of. The American transcendentalist discovered that life could be made a sublime thing without any assistance from circumstances or outside sources of pleasure and prosperity. Of course, this had been discovered many times before, and Emerson only took up the cry raised by Epictetus. But every man has to discover this fact freshly for himself, every man and every woman, of course. And when once he realises it, he knows that he would be a wretch if he did not endeavour to make the possibility a reality in his own life. The Stoic became sublime because he recognised his own absolute responsibility and did not try to evade it. The Transcendentalist was even more, because he had faith in the unknown and untried possibilities which lay within himself. The Occultist fully recognises the responsibility and claims his title by having both tried and acquired knowledge of his own possibilities. The knowledge that must be acquired is, of course, not intellectual, as HPB was trying to get across, but knowledge that takes us beyond the intellect that we so prize. This is a test to let go of that intellect when we are ready. It becomes a barrier at a certain stage, a comfort zone, and our lives are full of comfort zones in which there is a danger of stagnation. But the real comfort zone is the higher self, which is our Lord, our witness, our resting place, our asylum and our friend, as the Bhagavad Gita tells us. Though it can become our enemy if we war against it with our allegiance to the lower self and all its desires. I think we can be deceived by the idea that peace is not attainable or desirable. The peace we are thinking of in this case is that which HPB describes as related to the close of life and a religious state of mind. The kind of peace that I'm considering in this talk is that which is nurtured in the silence and is a positive and an ennobling concept which can be practically realised in our day-to-day lives. It's also essential in the world today to have at least some people who are aware of the potency of this kind of peace and are willing to make use of it in their lives. The singer Bob Marley stated that, "Don't gain the world and lose your soul. Wisdom is better than silver or gold." Wisdom is better than silver or gold. Which is very true, of course. There is nothing more precious than gaining true wisdom, which exalts the soul. John Lennon, who I mentioned earlier, also said, "If everyone demanded peace instead of another television set, then there'd be peace." If everyone demanded peace instead of another television set, then there'd be peace. This is simple but true again. If we put as much effort into gaining peace in ourselves and for the world as we do to accumulating material goods, then we would make considerable progress. The philosopher Spinoza also says, "For peace is not mere absence of war, but is a virtue that springs from the force of character." for peace is not mere absence of war, but is a virtue that springs from the force of character. Again, very, very profound. So the main idea that we need to get firmly fixed in our minds is that the kind of peace we are exploring in this talk is not at all passive, as we tend to think that it is. It is an active power that we can apply in our lives for the good of all. In the Bible, it is described as the peace that passeth all understanding, because it is a peace that cannot be reasoned via the intellectual part of our being. We have discussions about political peace, social peace, religious peace, etc., but none of these have ever seemed to work for a prolonged amount of time. Many of these have provided stopgaps, but have all come to an end as a result of individuals or groups that could not live up to the original ideal. I mean, flower power, I mentioned earlier, was an example of that. Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy of ahimsa, non-violence, and satyagraha, or soul force, were said to have failed and led to violence in the end. But this was not due to Gandhi or the ideals. It was because his followers had not the moral fibre to live up to them, or some of his followers anyway. Similar in some ways, as I said, to flower power. Sadly, this has been so throughout history. And of course, a lot of people have followed Gandhi's original teachings and have done immeasurably a lot of good in the world. Periods of great reform initiated by a great soul have often been followed by wars or uprisings because of this inability of later followers to live the life set out by the reformer, and also opposition by other factions and forces. This is very evident as regards Jesus, who taught a doctrine of love, but for centuries Christians fought and murdered innocent people in his name, almost anti-Christian. He was known to say that those who live by the sword will die by the sword, but still many of his followers paid no heed to this message. Now, Leo Tolstoy, who I admire a lot, and also H.P. Blavatsky did, in his series of essays, The Law of Love and the Law of Violence, goes into the whole subject at length and wrote in a letter to Gandhi, Christ knew, just as all reasonable human beings must know, that the employment of violence is incompatible with love, which is the fundamental law of life. He knew that once violence is admitted, it doesn't matter if even in a single case, the law of love is therefore rendered futile. That is to say that the law of love ceases to exist. The whole Christian civilization, so brilliant on the exterior, has grown up on this misunderstanding and this flagrant and strange contradiction, sometimes conscious, but mostly unconscious. So love and peace are generally classed together, usually. The hippies in the 60s will talk about love and peace and the revolution. But what do we mean by revolution in a higher sense? To go back to H.P. Blavatsky, she says, I say it again, it is only theosophy well understood that can save the world from despair by reproducing social and religious reform, a task once before accomplished in history by Gautama the Buddha. A peaceful reform, without one drop of blood spilt, each one remaining in the faith of his fathers, if he so chooses. To do this, he will only have to reject the parasitic plants of human fabrication, which at the present moment are choking all religions and churches in the world. Let him accept but the essence, which is the same in all. That is to say, the spirit which gives life to man in whom it resides, and renders him immortal. Let every man inclined to go on find his ideal, a star before him to guide him. Let him follow it without ever deviating from his path, and he is almost certain to reach the beacon light of life, the truth, no matter whether he seeks for and finds it at the bottom of a cradle or a well. So there you are, peaceful revolution. So the key to this quote are the words theosophy well understood. Theosophy was brought back into the public eye because it was seen by the masters that the world needed to comprehend the true meaning of universal brotherhood. So attempts were made to make us aware of our oneness with our fellow human beings and the whole of nature, and to show us clearly where we stand in the evolutionary scheme. So this is the main reason for studying theosophy and trying to make it a living reality in our day-to-day lives. It should be a motive for all our studies, in whatever spiritual tradition. A study of theosophy gives us deeper insights into the workings of nature, and therefore greater opportunity to practice along more enlightened lines of thought. Theosophy, of course, means divine wisdom and is wider than any society. There are many vehicles for true divine wisdom. But theosophy gives us the discrimination to know which are true and which are false. To be truly devoted to bringing peace on earth and goodwill to all beings, we must have a firm conviction that there must be no compromises created by indoctrination from society. So to quote again from Leo Tolstoy, this spring, at a scripture examination in a Moscow's girls' school, first the religious teacher and then an archbishop, who was also present, questioned the girls on the 10 Commandments, especially on the 6th, which is, "You thou shalt not kill." After the commandments had been correctly recited, the archbishop sometimes put a question, usually, "Is it always and in every case forbidden by the law of God to kill?" And the unfortunate girls, misled by their instructor, had to answer, and did answer, "Not always, for it is permissible in war and its executions." When, however, this customary additional question, whether it is always a sin to kill, was put to one of these unfortunate creatures, what I'm telling you is not an anecdote, but actually happened and was told me by an eyewitness, says Tolstoy, the girl coloured up and answered decidedly and with emotion, "Always." And despite all the customary sophistries of the archbishop, she held steadfastly to it that to kill is under all circumstances forbidden, even in the Old Testament, and that Christ had not only forbidden us to kill, but in general to do any harm to our neighbour. The archbishop, for all his majesty and verbal dexterity, was silenced, and victory remained with the girl. So good for her. So, for peace to be on this earth, we need to believe in it wholeheartedly, and to go about making it a reality in our daily lives. As said earlier, it is only when peace thrives within us and around us that the conditions arise for truly spiritual progress. St. Francis of Assisi said, "While you are proclaiming peace with your lips, be careful to have it more fully in your heart." While you are proclaiming peace with your lips, be careful to have it even more fully in your heart. Very, very profound. So is it possible to live peacefully despite the cacophony of the world around us and within us? I think it is definitely possible so long as we don't place mental barriers in our way. We must go about finding that calm centre that is the eye of the storm. In fact, most of our being is in that vast ocean of spiritual calm. All the disturbances are like waves on the ocean that come and go within time. But often it seems to us, because of our immersion in the illusion of time, that the passing is almost imperceptible, imperceptibly slow. But it will pass in the end. Therefore we can all take heart and know that the river of our life is moving gradually towards that ocean and will one day become part of it. The drop will merge within the ocean and vice versa. Now a quote from Rumi, the Sufi poet. He says, "Move beyond any attachment to names. Every war and every conflict between human beings has happened because of some disagreement about names. It's such an unnecessary foolishness, because just beyond the arguing there's a long table of companionship set and waiting for us to sit down. What is praised is one, so the praise is one too. Many jugs being poured into a huge basin. All religions, all this singing, one song. The differences are just illusions and vanity. Sunlight looks slightly different on this wall than it does on that wall, and a lot different on this other one, but it is still one light. We have borrowed these clothes, these time and space personalities from a light, and when we praise, we pour them back in. That's incredible, such a beautiful quote, beautiful poem, so deep. So we share the Spirit like we share the sunshine. It is one and the same in every one of us here. I sometimes think of Jonathan Swift's novel Gulliver's Travels, in one part of which he mentions the big engines and the little engines, who went to war over which end of the egg should be opened first at breakfast. It was a satirical swipe at society, which goes to war over things almost as trivial at times. But is there ever a time or a reason for people to actively try to maim and injure their fellow human beings? Look at it clearly, it's a complete insanity. But it's accepted by a lot of people because we're indoctrinated into it. Like the little girl. She wasn't. She went against it. It's not possible to kill at any time. But the other girls were indoctrinated into thinking it was necessary. Tolstoy also argued that if society had developed along the lines taught by Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, there would be no need for police forces, armies, etc., which are trained to use coercion to keep people in order. Unfortunately, we have created Frankenstein's monster, and now it turns on us. And the way the world has become, we have made it so these organisations are needed, and we follow a government that is totally materialistic in its outlook, which in its actions is diagrammatically opposed to what a spiritual thinking government would do. We're very much aware of that. Also, in a lot of places, war is glorified. Sometimes maybe to defend the country, you may have to do something, but it should never be glorified. Killing someone else must never be glorified. The first and most important thing to remember on the spiritual path is that we must learn to follow our own inner voice. As B.P. Wadya writes in an article on the inner ruler, commenting on a quote from HPB, B.P. Wadya was an early theosophist. He says, the first necessary qualification is an unshakable belief in one's own powers and the deity within oneself. Otherwise, a man would simply develop into an irresponsible medium. That's the quote from HPB. And B.P. Wadya goes on to say, the word medium is not to be taken in the ordinary spiritualistic sense, but as meaning a repository of other people's sundry thoughts, emotions, and aspirations, instead of developing one's own. We make ourselves larger storehouse for other people's ideas and inspirations. What about our own in the light of HPB's teaching, an unshakable belief in one's own powers and the deity within oneself? We are often in fear and trembling when our instincts and reasonings do not harmonise with other people's instincts and reasonings, like following the crowd. Why should they? We have each of us our own particular way of growth. We must quit the attitude of the child clinging to its mother's apron strings. Unless we do this, we shall not be able to apply HGB's teaching to ourselves individually. Throughout the whole mystic literature of the ancient world, we detect the same idea of spiritual esotericism, that the personal God exists within, nowhere outside the worshippers. So, that's a really good quote. So B.P. Wadya also talks about spiritual anarchy, taking the word anarchy in its true meaning, which is to be without rule. In a spiritual sense, this means to reach a state where we follow the dictates of our higher self. We don't follow rules that contradict our intuition. When awakened, if we all have the same goal, then no matter how differing are our paths to that goal, then we will eventually meet at the same place. If I can use the word place, for want of a better, well, there probably isn't a word for where we end up, if we ever do end up. So, the great heresy of separateness is predominant in modern society, and not only individuals but also religions and whole nations find it impossible to get on with each other. In the Bible, Matthew 24, verses 6 to 8, it is said, "You will hear of wars and rumours of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdoms against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginnings of birth pains." We can clearly see that this is all happening in the world at the moment, but all these things are signs of a transformation. To the fact that at times we only really learn through suffering. Of course, there are also times that we can acquire the right kind of knowledge during more congenial times of our life. But H.P. Blavatsky states, "Woe to those who live without suffering. Stagnation and death is the future of all that vegetates without change. And how can there be any change for the better without proportionate suffering during the preceding stage? Something that's necessary. It's not all suffering, hopefully there's some good times as well." That's from The Secret Doctrine, Volume 2, page 475, if people want to look it up in context. None of us really like change, but a development in our way of thinking forces change upon us. And though it is for our general good in the long run, the immediate effects can be painful to our transient personalities. The same applies on a national and a global level. What may seem to be senseless and cruel is in fact the workings of nature to bring about change, ultimately, hopefully, for the better. This may be of no consolation at all to those going through these difficult times, but students of theosophy and genuine spirituality are encouraged to widen their view of life and see the bigger picture. As regards mankind in general, the cruelty inflicted on his fellow creatures, whether human or otherwise, is due to this great dire heresy of separateness that weans us from the rest, mentioned in The Voice of the Silence, and the intense selfishness that pervades society at present. The root cause of this is ignorance of our true nature, and consequently a lack of respect for life in general, whether it be human or animal or plant. Once we begin to understand that there is one life in all things, and that everything shares this life with us, then we can start the process of re-becoming the spiritual beings we are in essence, and find that true peace that passeth all understanding. Let me conclude with the words of M.A. de Wolf Howe. He says, "There is one armour that the world of men and women as a world has never yet put on. The churches have long bungled with its fastenings, but the world has gone undefended, and few have been those in whose hands the mystical sword of the Spirit has shone with daily use. This armour waiting to be worn is the armour of brotherhood and sacrifice, the world of unselfishness, a conquering sword with the power, were used, to unite the world in love. And there are none who may not put it on." Thank you. Let's have a moment of quiet before I finish. Thank you very much for listening, those of you who have been listening. I'll see you very, very soon. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. Peace on earth and goodwill to all beings.